You're listening to I Am a Pain Patient with Mary Ann. Welcome to I Am a Pain Patient with Mary Ann. This week is exciting. We did a lot of big work last week, but this week I'm going to try to set everybody up to make progress. And that's an exciting thing for me. This week we're going to focus on the power of vulnerability. And I have been reading lately a beautiful book by Brené Brown called Daring Greatly. And I am just so inspired by that message of vulnerability. However, whenever vulnerability comes into play, we need to have boundaries around it. My whole inspiration behind this podcast is to use my story to help others navigate their story. And I will always say that your story is unique and unrepeatable. It is important. It matters. And it matters how we navigate that road back to wellness, to health and wellness. And so I want to be here for anybody who wants to reach out and find empathy, to hear a source of someone who has been there, who understands the innate struggles that come with a life of chronic pain, a life struggling with an illness, a life battling an illness. Empathy is a great and beautiful tool. But before we can be vulnerable, we have to build trust. So for myself as a presenter, when I come to share my story, it's because I have had the ability and the time and space that I need to fully process my story, to own my story, and to engage my story. So, as an example, my whiplash injury was 10 years ago. I recovered from chronic pain 5 years ago. I went on to live, married life, have babies, all the things. And I processed my story in the light of my experiences. I've brought it forward with me. I've had time to heal. So when I'm sharing my story, it's from a place of healing and wholeness. And so if you're still in the midst, I want to just remind you to be a steward of your vulnerability, to be a steward of your story, and to build trust before maybe launching into the whole thing. So here are some guidelines that I kind of keep in the forefront when I am approaching the idea of building trust in order to have that deeper relationship that includes vulnerability. So you can't have vulnerability without trust, and you can't have trust without vulnerability. So that's kind of the catch-22 here, where you kind of borrow back and forth from trust and vulnerability, and allow that to enliven your journey. So here are 8 pillars that I kind of put forth as those stepstones that allow us to build trust. The first of which is trust is built gradually. It doesn't happen overnight. I think back to my college days and those first weeks in the dorms and just wondering am I going to find friends here? And that just pit in your stomach, just kind of wondering oh, how do I do this? And one of my dear friends, who later became a roommate of mine, we were studying in the same common area for a while, and we started chatting, and I got to a point where I was like, okay, I could trust this person, I think. So I unloaded some things that I was feeling vulnerable about. And that act of just bearing your soul too soon can scare people away, one, and a lot of times people can use it as a tactic almost to be like, okay, well, I'm going to just share this thing, and if you don't leave, then we're going to be friends. But that can kind of be a bit of a misunderstanding of what vulnerability is and the gift that it can be when it's done well in a place of trust. And so we want to guard ourselves from just dumping out our whole story to somebody and just seeing if they stick around. We want to honor people with our vulnerability. And so in doing that, we understand that trust is built gradually. It's built over time. It's built by showing up again and again and again. So for me, with this podcast, I'm going to show up again and again and again. I'm going to be here with a message of hope. And over time, I hope that allows you to trust me and the words that I'm sharing with you, so that my story can be effective in your life, can be effective in the world. The second thing is that we need to communicate effectively. And so when we are sharing about ourselves, when we're opening up, when we're engaging in trust, in building trust, we need to have words around what we're talking about. And in the beautiful book, Daring Greatly, Brene Brown talks about combating shame and shame resilience. And the one thing that shame hates is having words wrapped around it. Being brought out of that dark place that we keep it underneath all the things and look away and out into the light and surrounded by adequate words, by communication, by effective communication. And it's difficult to find the right words for things sometimes. And so that's kind of like an interior challenge, to sit with something long enough that you yourself have adequate words to wrap around it, to bring it out into the light and share it. I don't want that to scare you from trying to find the words, but I do want that self-check to be there. Do I have the words for this? Is my audience going to be patient while I find the words for this, if that's the case? Because if it's someone that you've known your whole life, like a mother, a parent, your spouse, whoever, that best friend, they've been there, and so they might have the patience to allow you to find the words to communicate effectively. But as you're building trust, you want to know that you've kind of got the words that you need to wrap around that truth. The third pillar is consistency. Showing up again, again, again. Honoring small, vulnerable moments by showing up again afterwards. Being present through suffering with another. I've got a beautiful neighbor friend whom I have met with in the last couple of months, over the summer. And we just moved to this house a year ago, and we were just in the midst with our youngest. And so I didn't make very many friends that first year that we lived here. And I'm so happy to have begun to make friends now. But that consistency of being present to those people, to honoring their stories, to hearing about their lives and what they face and the things that they struggle with, and showing up again after revelations of hardship. Or just reaching out and sending a text message hey, I'm thinking about you, or leaving a note in somebody's mailbox. I love that. The fourth pillar I have is be true to your word. This is huge. This is like a huge thing for me. Do what you say you are going to do. That is hard for some people. Because in the midst of strife, for example, like in my relationship with my spouse, it can be easy in like an argument to be like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. But then you have to follow up with time management, with logistics, with multitasking, with moving one piece forward at a time on a plan and finishing a project. And if you remember from last week, one of those things that becomes difficult with a life that is inundated with cortisol, where your nervous system is living kind of more flared up, that completing projects can be difficult. So asking others to bear with you as you continue to show up for them. And metering those relationships in your life to see them show up for you. It's important. So the fifth pillar is honesty. Speaking your truth. In this pillar, I'm going to speak a little bit about perspective. And this is the topic we're going to return to over and over again in this podcast. Because all of our experiences, our memories, our take on the world is colored by our perspective. And so when we are approaching communication with others, we have to kind of keep that in mind, that we can only be truthful and honest about our story, our perspective. And we can't know what another person is thinking, what another person is going through, what another person is carrying. And so we can only be truthful and honest about our story. We can be present and try to draw out that truth from another person, but that patience to do so, to sit in the messy middle with somebody and listen and really honor their perspective and their story. Because unless you're walking in their shoes, you can't know how hard something is. When you're a pain patient or when you have an illness that you're struggling with, it can be easy when you're listening to somebody be like, well, that's nothing because listen to what I carry. No. Just no, don't do that. You want to honor someone else's truth and the hardships that they bear. We cannot know the fullness of how someone experiences something unless we've gone through it ourselves. We can offer solidarity. We can offer a space from which like empathy is shown, where you're like, oh yeah, that is hard. Like, it's okay to say a hard thing is hard. So honestly, being true to your story, allowing the space for other people to have a story and a truth and to share openly and receive in truth those hard things. So 6, helping others. That's kind of the birthplace of this podcast, is that desire of mine to help others with my story. Just by being real with it, like that honesty piece, like, okay, this is hard. It's hard to get through chronic pain. It is not easy. It is not for the faint of heart, but it can be done. So allowing your story and your presence to help others navigate hard things. That's a way of being present and allowing that trust to get built gradually over time and be built one step upon another. So step 7 would be show your feelings. So notice that show your feelings is further down on the list, or further up, however you want to view this ladder. So once you've built trust gradually, you've communicated effectively, you've been consistent, you're true to your word, you're honest, you're available to help others, you can start showing their feelings around hard things. So saying, hey, yeah, I'm struggling with that too, in one conversation. And then later, give it time to percolate, have another connection. Hey, I remember you saying that that this thing that I'm going through is hard. Can we talk more about that? Yes, I would love to. And then showing your feelings and how difficult traversing hardship really is. The weight of traversing through hardship, that loneliness of not knowing whether or not you're the only person in the world experiencing these things. And when we have built that trust and we open ourselves up to that question, like, am I the only one? Let me tell you, you will find that you are not the only one to be traversing hard things. You are not the only one who suffers. And there's a beautiful freedom in that, of knowing that you're not alone and that we can navigate hard things, oftentimes together. We're stronger together than we are by ourselves. And then the final piece here is admit mistakes. I am a strong-willed choleric. Do you know who makes mistakes all the time? This girl. And it can feel scary to admit that you've made a mistake. I think back to previous jobs that I've held where you get that moment in your workplace where you notice that you've made a mistake and not ooh, okay. So it is vulnerable to admit that you've made a mistake. In my career, I've spent 8 years as a bookkeeper. So if you make a mistake as a bookkeeper, you don't want to keep that to yourself. You want to bring it out into the light. And my employer at one of my workplaces is still one of my best friends, and he's my spiritual director. But I would come to him when I made mistakes, and he loved that about me. Because he's like, you know what? I know that you make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But what I admire about you is that you admit it and you let me help you. You let me walk beside you as we discover the right solution. And then it comes back to communicating effectively about mistakes. So that comes with humility. And humility is knowing things as they are in truth. And that's something that we're going to say over and over in this group until it sinks in. That humility is knowing how things are in truth and admitting the truth. And so when you admit mistakes, you allow people to journey with you. This kind of goes part and parcel with soliciting advice. You don't want someone to just give you advice if you're not soliciting it. But often when you're admitting a mistake, it's okay, how can we make this right? So you're collaborating with somebody to repair a relationship. And now those moments of repair, they're so necessary. In married life, repair is something that probably happens or should happen every day. Every day there are things that need repair. It's very exciting and very difficult to create an atmosphere that is open to repair. And so that trust piece is really important, to show up again and again and to be truthful, to own your story, own your perspective, be curious about the other side of the story. Draw that out in truth from your friends, from those people that you've met, that you're building relationships with, and step boldly into a bright future where the relationships in your life are deeper, the connections are brighter, and you live a life that's full of the hope that this is not the end of your story, it's the middle. And what a glorious thing that is.